Welcome to the deep dive. We are tackling a figure today who, well, in the popular imagination, is pretty much synonymous with absolute selfless goodness.
Mm-hmm.
Yet her legacy is arguably one of the most fiercely debated ethical puzzles of the 20th century. Mother Teresa.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating duality.
Our mission here really is to sort through this massive spectrum of source material. I mean, it's huge.
It really is.
On one side, you've got the hagiography, the saintly image, global accolades, the Nobel Peace Prize.
The face everyone recognizes.
Exactly. But then on the other side, we face these intense, really persistent critiques, things concerning her financial transparency, some controversial political connections.
Yeah, those are definitely there.
And maybe most seriously, the medical ethics and the actual quality of care provided in her homes. It's a real challenge, trying to synthesize all this, holding these opposing realities in mind.
And what's so fascinating, I think, is that we're dealing with these two remarkably parallel narratives of the same woman. You have Anjezi Gangshi Bojaksiu, that's her birth name, the fiercely devoted Albanian Indian Catholic saint. And then you have the global organizational powerhouse she created.
A massive operation.
Huge. So our goal, as we explore these sources, isn't really to deliver some simple judgment like good or bad.
No, it's way more complex than that.
It's about synthesizing how one individual can inspire such widespread, profound devotion, while simultaneously generating such persistent, contradictory, and frankly, often scathing critiques throughout her entire public life, and even now, years after her death.
Yeah, we want to find those moments that really make you lean forward, those aha moments maybe, that help us understand the profound internal struggle and the external complexity that defined her existence. We'll look at how this, immensely complex legacy was built, stone by stone, miracle by alleged miracle, and criticism by criticism. So let's unpack this remarkable journey, starting right at her origins. Okay, so the story begins with a name most people probably don't associate with the global icon, Anjezi Gangshi Bojaksiu. She was born August 26, 1910, in Skopje, which back then was part of the Ottoman Empire. A thriving center, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an early curiosity right there. While that was her birth date, the sources consistently note she considered August 27th, her baptism day, her true birthday.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? It immediately prioritizes her spiritual identity over her, physical one.
Yeah.
Right from the start.
Exactly. And she was raised in a devoutly Catholic, Kosovar Albanian family. So an environment of really deep religious commitment from day one.
And that faith was tested early and violently. Her father, who was a successful businessman, but also deeply involved in Albanian community politics. He died suddenly when she was only 8.
And the circumstances around his death, they're pretty relevant, aren't they, to understanding the volatility of her early life, the whole political backdrop?
Absolutely. Sources suggest he was possibly poisoned. This was after he visited Belgrade for a political meeting in 1919.
Wow.
And this act was largely attributed to Serbian agents, given the really fraught political environment at the time.
So that sheer trauma, this early politically charged loss, it's often cited as a likely factor that profoundly shaped her spiritual resolve, maybe her focus on the eternal rather than, the messy, temporary politics of the world.
It makes sense. And that political and spiritual conviction, it developed incredibly rapidly. Biographies detail how she became fascinated by the lives of Jesuit missionaries, especially their reports from Bengal in India.
From a young age.
Yeah, by the age of 12, she felt this absolute commitment to religious life. It wasn't just a casual interest. It was like her direction was set in stone, fixed, immutable.
And that conviction, it led to a monumental personal sacrifice. In 1928, she's 18, she leaves home to join the Sisters of Loreto at Loreto Abbey in Ireland.
Right, Ireland.
And why Ireland? Well, specifically to learn English. That was the required language of instruction for the Sisters of Loreto mission in India.
A practical necessity for her calling.
But this move was radical, and the consequences, devastatingly permanent.
Yeah, the source confirmed this was a complete severing. She travels to India in 1929, starts her novitiate in Darjeeling, begins teaching.
But the tragedy is the political situation back home in Albania.
Exactly. Her mother and sister moved to Tirana, and then the rise of this fiercely anti-religious communist regime under Enver Hoxha, classified Mother Teresa as a dangerous agent of the Vatican.
Just imagine that. That political reality, the true cost of her conviction. She gives up her family for the mission, and she literally can't go back. Not by choice, but because the regime denied her repeated international requests to visit them.
It's heartbreaking. She never saw her mother or sister again. Both died during Hoxha's rule.
Wow.
The emotional weight of this is captured in the sources. Dom Lushjeg, who chronicled her life, he recounts this deeply emotional instance. She visited the embassy seeking permission, and someone saw her crying, saying something like, "Dear God, I can understand and accept that I should suffer, but it's so hard to understand and accept why my mother has to suffer. In her old age, she has no other wish than to see us one last time."
Oh, that's rough. So she was already operating at this level of profound personal sacrifice way before she became famous.
Way before. She took her first vows in 1931, adopting the name Teresa after Therese de Lisieux, the patron saint of missionaries.
Right.
Then she took her solemn vows in 1937 while teaching in Calcutta. She eventually became Mother Teresa as part of the Loreto tradition. And by 1944, she was appointed headmistress of the Loreto Convent School in Italy.
But while she was teaching, she was becoming increasingly disturbed, wasn't she, by the sheer scale of human misery just outside the convent walls?
Yes, hugely. Exacerbated by things like the Bengal famine of 1943 and then the horrific violence of Direct Action Day in 1946 in Calcutta.
Terrible times.
Awful. And this internal conflict, between the relative security of the convent and the suffering right there in the streets, it really set the stage for the pivotal moment.
Which brings us to the famous call within the call. In September 1946. She's on a train going to Darjeeling for her annual retreat.
And she experiences what she described as this explicit directive from God. Leave the convent, embrace the poverty of the slums, and serve the poorest of the poor.
That's the phrase.
That's the phrase. And this wasn't just like a career change. It was a total revolution of her life, her spiritual commitment. She had to get permission from the Vatican to leave her established cloistered order.
Which must have been a process in itself.
Oh, absolutely. Then she trades the traditional Loreto habit for that simple, now instantly recognizable white cotton sari with the blue border. She gets some basic medical training in Patna.
Crucially, she adopted Indian citizenship too, right? Signaling her permanent commitment.
Yes, very important. Before venturing into the Calcutta slums to begin her independent ministry.
And the accounts of that initial period, they're crucial for understanding this narrative of her kind of saintly fortitude. She herself documented how incredibly difficult it was.
Oh, yeah.
Struggling with no income, literally having to beg for food and supplies. She recorded experiencing intense spiritual doubt, loneliness, the temptation to just go back to the stability of the convent.
She wrote about it in her diary, didn't she? Capturing that conflict.
Yeah, something like, "Then the comfort of Loreto came to tempt me. You have only to say the word and all that will be yours again," the tempter kept on saying.
Powerful stuff.
And then she concludes that thought with this really defiant declaration of commitment. "A free choice, my God, and out of love for you, I desire to remain and do whatever be your holy will in my regard. I did not let a single tear come."
Wow. And that really established the foundational narrative, didn't it?
Yeah.
Of heroic self-denial, spiritual struggle that just propelled her image forward.
So that incredible resolve, it leads in 1950 to the formal establishment of the Missionaries of Charity, a new diocesan congregation recognized by the Vatican. And she clearly articulated their mission to care for, quote, "the hungry, the naked, the homeless, the crippled, the blind, the lepers, all those people who feel unwanted, unloved, uncared for throughout society, people that have become a burden to the society and are shunned by everyone."
It's a very broad mandate, but focused on the completely marginalized.
And their identity became instantly recognizable globally, defined by that simple white cotton sari with the blue border.
The uniform.
Right. And beyond the three traditional religious vows, chastity, poverty, obedience, the Missionaries of Charity formalized this distinct, powerful fourth vow.
Yes, this is key. To give wholehearted free service to the poorest of the poor.
Free service.
Exactly. Free. Reinforcing the organization's commitment to avoiding charges for any care offered. That's a really important distinction later on.
And this core commitment, it materialized pretty quickly. In 1952, with some help from Calcutta officials, she opened her first hospice.
Right. She converted an abandoned Hindu temple into the Kaladat home for the dying.
Which she immediately renamed Normal Friday, or Home of the Pure Heart, a space specifically for the destitute.
And the purpose of Normal Friday. This is probably the single most critical detail for understanding the decades of controversy that followed.
Okay, lay it out.
The goal, as she articulated it, was fundamentally not medical cure. It was to allow people to die with dignity in accordance with their faith.
Right, so providing religious rights and comfort.
Exactly.
Right.
Water from the Ganges for Hindus, reading the Quran for Muslims, administering extreme unction, the final Catholic rites for Christians, whatever was appropriate for their background.
So the emphasis was on dignity and spiritual preparation over, say, aggressive medical intervention. That's the crucial distinction here.
Precisely. She defined the vision simply. A beautiful death is for people who lived like animals to die like angels loved and wanted.
That's a powerful quote.
It is. And this mission statement, placing comfort, love, spiritual readiness above clinical success, well, that was a foundational choice that would later bring the organization into pretty fierce conflict with critics demanding modern healthcare standards.
Oh, okay, I see how that sets things up.
From that foundation, the organization just scaled at a breathtaking pace. She opened a hospice for those with leprosy, calling it Shantinagar, City of Peace. They started taking in a growing number of homeless children, which led to establishing Nirmala Shishu Bhavan, the Children's Home of the Immaculate Heart, in 1955.
So expanding the scope of care.
Definitely. And the expansion outside India started just over a decade later. 1965, a house opens in Venezuela with just 5 sisters.
Wow, small start internationally.
Tiny. But followed quickly by houses in Rome, Tanzania, Austria by 1968. By the 1970s, they had dozens of centers across Asia, Africa, Europe, and the United States. It just exploded.
With that rapid growth, it must have necessitated establishing associated branches, right? To manage the scale and the different needs.
Exactly. The Missionaries of Charity Brothers were founded in 1963, and later the Missionaries of Charity Fathers in 1984. Plus, they recruited millions of lay co-workers eventually. This wasn't just a local Calcutta ministry anymore. It became a global infrastructure of Catholic service delivery.
The numbers really confirm that shift, don't they? From a small local order to a global power by the time she died in 1997.
Yeah, the organization had grown from those initial 13 sisters in Calcutta to over 4,000 sisters, operating 517 missions in over 100 countries.
Incredible scale.
And even by 2007, a decade after her death, the Missionaries of Charity still numbered about 4,500 brothers and 5,000 sisters worldwide, managing 600 missions, soup kitchens, schools, shelters. She built something massive, dedicated to reaching those literally rejected by society wherever they were.
So Mother Teresa's transition from this kind of regional figure in Calcutta to a full-blown international icon, it happened pretty swiftly in the early 1970s.
Yeah, largely thanks to one person, really, the British journalist Malcolm Muggeridge.
Right, his 1969 BBC documentary, Something Beautiful for God, and then the book that followed in 71, that just catapulted her to international fame.
And it coincided with Muggeridge undergoing his own very public spiritual conversion, which probably added to the narrative's power.
Good point. And the documentary generated intense global attention, but crucially, it generated one of the most famous and persistent anecdotes of her life, the divine light controversy.
Ah, yes, the light story.
Footage shot inside the home for the dying was taken in extremely poor light conditions. The cameraman apparently thought the film would be unusable.
Right, too dark.
But when the film was developed, the image was clear. Muggeridge immediately declared it a miracle of divine light shining from Mother Teresa herself.
A pretty compelling story.
Very, except other crew members offered a very different, much more technical explanation.
Which was?
That it was simply due to a new, ultra-sensitive Kodak film they had been using for the shoot, something designed for low-light conditions.
Ah, the mundane explanation.
Exactly, but the miracle narrative stuck hard. It really cemented her image in the popular mind as this figure of unique spiritual power, and it paved the way for just a barrage of major honors.
The awards definitely came rapidly after that. She received the Ramon Magsaysay Peace Prize in 1962, often called the Asian Nobel. And then in 1979, the biggest one of all, the Nobel Peace Prize, awarded for work undertaken in the struggle to overcome poverty and distress, which also constitutes a threat to peace.
And her actions around the Nobel Prize itself are frequently cited as maybe the strongest evidence of her profound personal commitment to poverty.
You mean refusing the banquet?
Yeah, famously refusing the conventional ceremonial banquet for the laureates. She requested that the equivalent cost, I think it was calculated then at about $192,000, be given directly to the poor in India.
Arguing that earthly celebrations were secondary to immediate immediate needs. It was a powerful gesture.
Definitely. And her Nobel lecture, it further cemented this persona, didn't it? Offering this startling distinction between material poverty and spiritual emptiness.
Yeah, she distinguished between the two. She said something like, around the world, not only in the poor countries, but I found the poverty of the West so much more difficult to remove.
Right.
But a person that is shut out, that feels unwanted, unloved, terrified, the person that has been thrown out from society, that poverty is so hurt, sick, and so much. And I find that very difficult.
So it suggested this global scope to her mission, right? Addressing the spiritual destitution of the wealthy, as well as the material destitution of the poor.
Exactly. It broadened her appeal immensely.
Beyond the Nobel, she continued to receive major honors. The Bharat Ratna, India's highest civilian award, in 1980, honorary American citizenship in 1996.
A whole string of them.
But here's where the, let's say, ethical trap started to emerge. That massive global scale meant she had to engage with powerful figures and sometimes deeply corrupt ones, which led to some deeply controversial associations.
Exactly. This is a major area of criticism. The sources heavily criticize her, for example, for accepting the Haitian Legion of Honor, a major award from the Duvalier regime.
And we have to remember, the Duvaliers, Papa Doc and Baby Doc, they ruled Haiti as kleptocrats, systematically looting the state, suppressing dissent through violence. Just brutal dictators.
Absolutely. And critics argue that by accepting an honor from such a regime, her implicit support, or at least her tacit acceptance, lent legitimacy to this profoundly corrupt dictatorship, possibly in exchange for political access or funds.
Yeah, the why is often debated, but the acceptance itself was the issue.
Right. And it wasn't just dictators. She faced intense scrutiny for her support of corrupt businessmen, too.
Like Charles Keating.
Most notably, Charles Keating, central figure in the massive savings and loan scandal in the U.S., which cost taxpayers billions. She actually wrote a letter to the presiding judge requesting clemency for him.
And she had received substantial donations from Keating, hadn't she?
She had. And when the prosecutor, Paul Turley, wrote to her explaining the scale of Keating's fraud, asking her to return the stolen money for the benefit of the victims, she never responded.
Ooh, that doesn't look good.
No. It suggested to critics this kind of pragmatic approach to fundraising that maybe sometimes overshadowed basic ethical considerations or accountability regarding where the donations came from.
But on the flip side, her influence could also be channeled into these dramatic, positive, humanitarian actions, like during the Siege of Beirut in 1982.
Yeah, that was an incredible moment, a terrifying point in the Lebanese civil war. She leveraged her global status to broker a temporary ceasefire between the Israeli army and Palestinian guerrillas.
Just pause the war for a bit.
Pretty much. And that temporary lull in fighting allowed her and Red Cross workers to go into the war zone and rescue 37 children trapped in a frontline hospital.
That's like something out of a movie, a moment of pure heroic intervention.
It really was. And she also demonstrated remarkable resilience by expanding her missions into communist countries that had previously rejected the Missionaries of Charity, visiting Armenia after the devastating 1988 earthquake, for example.
She had this practical philosophy, didn't she? In the face of political obstacles, something like, no matter who says what, you should accept it with a smile and do your own work.
That sums it up pretty well. But as we move into the next section, we see that it wasn't just her affiliations that were under attack. Her methods themselves faced intense, prolonged criticism.
Okay, so this is where the synthesis gets really difficult, isn't it? We're dealing with accusations that don't just question her judgment, but the very moral foundation of her ministry.
Right. Despite the massive scale of her charity, despite the millions, maybe hundreds of millions in donations flowing in, the most consistent, well-documented critiques center on the fundamental lack of quality of care provided in the very homes meant to serve the poorest.
There was a comprehensive paper by some Canadian academics, Revered, Chenard, Seneschal, that really detailed these concerns.
Yes, they argue that while her clinics receive vast sums of money, and sources do indicate the Missionaries of Charity handled huge amounts, often untraced. Yeah, financial transparency was another major criticism. But their point was, these clinics consistently lacked basic medical necessities.
Like what specifically?
Crucially, they pointed to the consistent refusal to implement systematic diagnosis, provide adequate nutrition, or, and this is the big one, offer sufficient analgesics, strong pain relief, for people suffering intense terminal pain.
And the argument was this wasn't due to poverty, right? Because the money was demonstrably there.
Correct. The critics argue the resources existed, but weren't applied to this kind of basic medical standard.
And this alleged refusal of basic modern pain relief, it's directly tied to that highly controversial idea that Mother Teresa promoted a cult of suffering.
Exactly. Critics claim she intentionally denied modern medical treatment because she believed the sick must suffer like Christ on the cross, viewing suffering itself as some kind of spiritual pathway to purification.
There are quotes attributed to her supporting this view, aren't there?
Yes. The sources quote her stating things like, "There is something beautiful in seeing the poor accept their lot, to suffer it like Christ's passion. The world gains greatly from their suffering."
Wow. For many critics, that theological outlook fundamentally undermines the whole mission of charity, doesn't it? It replaces practical relief with an endorsement of human misery for spiritual gain.
That's precisely the argument. And this stance led to the most high-profile and, frankly, stinging critiques, particularly from the late journalist and intellectual Christopher Hitchens.
Hitchens. His 1995 book, The Missionary Position, and his testimony opposing her canonization, he was probably her most vocal critic.
Absolutely. He argued she was a friend of poverty, meaning she loved the idea of poverty as a condition that facilitated spirituality and conversion.
Rather than being a friend of the poor, seeking to actually eliminate their misery through modern means.
That was his core charge. And he also levied this powerful accusation of hypocrisy.
The difference in care.
Yeah, citing the documented disparity between the care her patients received in places like Normal Friday and the care she sought for herself when she was ill.
Right. He pointed out that Mother Teresa, when she had heart problems, chose advanced, expensive, specialized treatment in Western hospitals, including in the U.S.
While allegedly denying basic pain relief and modern diagnostic testing to her own patients in Calcutta.
His argument was deeply confrontational. If suffering was truly this spiritual gift, why did she actively seek the most advanced medical intervention possible to minimize her own suffering?
It's a sharp question. And the defense that she was sometimes hospitalized against her wishes while stated by some staff, well, it doesn't fully negate the fact that she was accessing standards of care vastly beyond anything offered in her own homes for the dying.
Hitchens also went deeper, didn't he? Questioning her core motives for all the work.
Yes. He asserted her intention wasn't purely social work, but explicitly to expand the number of Catholics. He recalled her telling him directly, something like, "I'm not a social worker. I don't do it for this reason. I do it for Christ. I do it for the church."
So for her critics, this placed conversion and proselytization above straightforward humanitarian relief.
That was the interpretation, yes.
Now, okay, we have to look at the powerful defense offered by those closest to her. Her authorized biographer, Navin Chawla, has consistently countered these claims.
Right, arguing that critics fundamentally misunderstand the purpose of the missions.
What was his argument?
Chawla argues the homes were never intended to be state-of-the-art hospitals. Calcutta already had those. They were intended as refuges for the dying poor who had been turned away by every other institution, places where they could at least die being comforted and with some dignity.
So the idea wasn't to cure the terminally ill, but to prevent them from dying alone and uncared for in the street.
That's the core of the defense. Similarly, Sister Mary Prima Pyrrhic, the former superior general, affirmed their primary goal was alleviating suffering through comfort and love, not cultivating it.
And what about the lack of specific analgesics? How did they address that?
She and other defenders argued that resources, while vast in aggregate, were focused on scaling up the number of missions to reach more people globally, and that medical practices were often constrained by the immediate environment and, frankly, a lack of medically trained sisters running things day to day.
So a resource allocation argument and a skills gap argument.
Essentially, yes.
Now, the local Indian perspective adds another dimension, separate from these Western academic or journalistic critiques.
Right. Physician Arup Chatterjee, an activist who actually grew up in Calcutta, did extensive research. He stated he never even saw any nuns in those slums in the earlier period, suggesting maybe she exaggerated the scale and depth of her daily work within the city itself.
Interesting. And he also documented long-standing hygiene issues, didn't he?
Yes, like the widely criticized practice of reusing hypodermic needles after only rinsing them in tap water. A practice he claims that only improved after her death in 1997.
Which highlights the very real, practical danger of maybe prioritizing spiritual comfort over basic clinical sanitation.
It certainly raises that question. And politically, within India, you had opposition too. The Hindu right-wing organization Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, the RSS, Their leader, Mohan Bhagwat, claimed Mother Teresa's primary objective was religious conversion, arguing her social service was merely a means to facilitate her religious mission, which reflects this deeper suspicion within parts of India regarding foreign-funded religious charities.
Okay. And finally, we can't ignore her firm, often controversial political and moral stands, positions that were sometimes at odds with her humanitarian image.
Definitely. She was absolutely uncompromising in her opposition to abortion and contraception, even on her global stage.
She used her Nobel platform for that, right?
She did, declaring abortion the greatest destroyer of peace today, arguing that if a mother can kill her own child, what's left to stop anyone from killing anyone else? Her stance was clear. The sanctity of life was absolute, period, regardless of consequences like poverty or overpopulation.
And then there was that highly difficult controversy in 1994 involving the Jesuit priest Donald McGuire.
Yes, he was her confessor, and he faced multiple sexual abuse allegations.
And she intervened to defend him.
She did. She argued her confidence and trust in McGuire and pushed aggressively for his reinstatement to the ministry, prioritizing, it seems, loyalty and her personal relationship.
Which became completely indefensible when McGuire was later convicted of multiple molestation charges years later.
Exactly. That episode revealed a potential blind spot, didn't it? Suggesting maybe a willingness to prioritize institutional protection or personal loyalty over the protection of alleged victims, which further complicates that saintly reputation.
So we've seen these incredible external conflicts, the global recognition versus the sharp ethical critiques. But now we need to turn inward to perhaps the most astonishing and maybe spiritually profound revelation about her life.
Yeah, this is really something.
For nearly 50 years, almost her entire public ministry, the woman seen globally as the epitome of Catholic certainty and unwavering faith, privately endured this devastating spiritual crisis, a period she referred to as emptiness and darkness.
It's a monumental finding. Her private correspondence, which was revealed after her death against her wishes.
She wanted it destroyed.
She did. It showed that Mother Teresa, despite her heroic public ministry, experienced grave doubts about God's existence, deep pain over her lack of faith. She feared she was a massive hypocrite, secretly feeling nothing but spiritual desolation and emotional barrenness while publicly promoting absolute faith to the entire world.
The letters themselves are incredibly visceral, painful to read. She wrote to her spiritual confidant, revealing this void. "Where is my faith? Even deep down, there is nothing but emptiness and darkness. If there be God, please forgive me."
Imagine carrying that. In another letter, the spiritual desolation is almost physical. I look and do not see, listen, and do not hear. The tongue moves in prayer, but does not speak.
Wow. And she carried this agonizing doubt, this perceived absence of God from 1948 until her death in 1997, pretty much the whole time she was famous.
For decades. This context is absolutely necessary to appreciate her life, I think. Her work wasn't driven by the comfort of faith, but by sheer painful will, despite feeling abandoned.
This intense internal struggle, it's known in Catholic tradition as the dark night of the soul, right? Famously experienced by other saints, including her namesake, St. Therese of Lisieux.
Correct. And she requested these letters be destroyed because she feared people would think more of me, less of Jesus, suggesting she worried her personal struggle would overshadow the message of Christ she was trying to promote.
Yet, ironically, Catholic theology views such prolonged doubt and suffering not as an impediment to sainthood, but almost as a path to purification.
Exactly, a heroic act of perseverance that actually elevates the merits of her faith in their view. Her decades of internal anguish were ultimately cited as evidence of her profound sacrifice during her canonization process.
So this intense private suffering didn't stall her progression towards sainthood at all. The process requires documentation of at least 2 miracles resulting from the intercession of the prospective saint.
Right. The first miracle needed for her beatification in 2003 was the alleged healing of Monica Besra, an Indian woman with an abdominal tumor.
What was the claim?
Besra claimed she was cured after a locket containing Teresa's picture was placed on her abdomen. This seemingly straightforward act was pretty swiftly accepted by the Vatican.
However, the conflicting evidence surrounding this first miracle perfectly mirrors the conflict of her public life, doesn't it? Pitting the spiritual narrative against clinical documentation.
Absolutely perfectly. Besra's husband and some of her medical staff publicly stated that she was actually cured by conventional medical treatment.
Which was?
Specifically, a prolonged course of anti-tuberculosis medication that eradicated what turned out to be a massive tuberculosis-related cyst, not a cancerous tumor.
So medicine not a miracle.
That's what they claimed. They alleged that hospital officials, under intense pressure from the Missionaries of Charity, were basically pressured to dismiss the medical records and certify the cure as miraculous.
Wow. Besra's husband explicitly called the miracle a hoax, stating his wife was cured by medicine, not the locket.
Yeah. So this conflict really demonstrates a persistent difficulty in separating piety from practicality, even after her death.
But despite that controversy, the Vatican recognized the healing, leading to her beatification.
They did. The final hurdle, the second miracle required for canonization, was confirmed in 2015. This involved the healing of a Brazilian man with multiple brain tumors in 2008. That paved the way.
Setting the stage for the final global ceremony.
And so, the Albanian Indian nun, born Anjezi Gongsha Bojuksiu, who secretly suffered decades of spiritual doubt while building this global empire of charity. She was formally canonized as Saint Teresa of Calcutta by Pope Francis on September 4, 2016.
And her global impact continues to be recognized beyond just the church, right? The UN designated the anniversary of her death, September 5th, as the International Day of Charity.
Correct. Ensuring her foundational act of service, however complex, remains part of the global humanitarian calendar.
So we start this deep dive looking at this vast spectrum of sources, and what really emerges is this image of radical complexity.
Definitely not simple.
You have the global icon of selfless service, operating missions in, 123 countries by the end, contrasted so sharply with these severe critics who documented poor medical ethics, questionable financial transparency, politically compromising associations.
Yeah, the two sides are stark. And her ministry, it forces us to consider these fundamental ethical questions that really defy easy answers.
Like what?
Well, her defenders argue that her homes provided love and dignity to those completely rejected by the system, achieving a kind of spiritual good that maybe outweighed the lack of advanced medical technology.
But the critics argue that love without adequate pain management is just inadequate, right? Especially given the vast wealth reportedly available to the order.
Precisely. It's a genuine challenge to any kind of linear moral judgment. If the ultimate goal is spiritual salvation or a good death, does the methodology, the alleged cult of suffering, the lack of modern analgesics, does that negate the value of the comfort provided?
It's a tough question.
And this brings us back, I think, to the central contradiction of her life, a tension we see running through all the sources we've looked at.
Which is?
Her greatest contradiction might not have been between wealth and poverty, but between her external, rigid certainty regarding moral policy on issues like abortion, or the theological justification for suffering.
Compared to
her decades of internal, agonizing doubt about God's very existence.
that profound private vulnerability. The fact that she operated this massive global ministry for 5 decades, basically believing she was spiritually hollow, that really changes the calculus of judgment entirely, doesn't it?
It has to, I think. Does that documented inner turmoil change how we judge the severity of her public policy failures? Or the unwavering nature of her controversial moral positions? It complicates everything.
Yeah.
Which leads to a truly provocative final thought for you, the listener, to explore. Her work fundamentally raised the question about the nature of charity itself. Is it better to relieve immediate, physical suffering, regardless of the methodology used, even if it's flawed? Or is the ultimate responsibility of aid providers to challenge and correct the systemic causes of poverty, using the best available modern efficacy, even if it reaches fewer people initially?
Where does the responsibility lie? We invite you to explore that question further as you reflect on the life of this profoundly complex 20th century figure.
Thank you for joining us as we explore the intricate details of the legacy of St. Teresa of Calcutta.
We hope this deep exploration has given you a clearer picture of her journey with all its light and shadows. We'll see you next time.